Hello, welcome back. This is Isaac and you're watching ACT Reading Prep. We're continuing into the humanities section of the reading passages today, and I'm hoping that you've gotten a sense of what we're supposed to do with the prose fiction and as well as the social sciences, and that you know how to read them fast or how to connect the dots real fast and answer the questions in a more accurate or more precise manner. Now, some of you asked me, or some of the feedback from the students or from you was that how do you actually do this in a limited or given amount of time? Or how do you overcome the time factor as well as the contents, which seem to be quite strenuous, compared to the time that you're given. Now, one of the ideas here is that you're supposed to make use of this connecting the dot method. Now, of course, I wouldn't say this is a standard method, but as far as we're concerned, what we want to do is we don't want to read well, but we want to find the answers well, right? I mean, reading would be it's a very time-consuming process in which if you want to be really good at reading, it will take you time to absorb that skill from, reading different materials. But for right now, what we want to do is we want to really read and pick out the important information fast enough so that we can solve the questions, the 10 questions given within one passage, say within 5 or 7 minutes time, because you're only given, say, about 8 minutes time or 9 minutes tops for one part or one passage from the ACT reading. So again, here, what you really need to do is you need to connect the dots, okay? So read the important passage or important parts of the passages, or find out the important information from within the passage, and try finding the connection between these passages, and try to connect those ideas, making use of your it could be imaginations, it could be your background knowledge, or whichever suits you. You need to use that to come to some kind of an understanding of the passage, not by reading the entire thing, but reading the only important parts of the passages, right? I mean, that's the important part. And many of you seem to have a problem doing so. Now, one of the reasons is because you're not so familiar with the passage, or the topics of the passage, or how the reading passages, or how the writers write their pieces. Now, the idea here is that writers write it in a certain way. I mean, you as a writer would write it in a certain way, right? If you were to talk about a content. And most often than not, most of these writers will write it in a similar pattern, because human beings think about, it's pretty much similar how humans, agree upon an idea or disagree upon an idea. And so therefore, what we really want to do is fill in those gaps that you have, but by not reading the entire passage, which are basic knowledge, which are understanding of the pattern of what the writer is trying to convey to you. And that should give a good understanding of what the passage will talk about, right? And second of all, you need to remember what the different paragraphs we're talking about, so that when you're going back in the passage, or when you're going back to the passage after reading the questions, right, you will take less time than you would normally would. Okay, so those are the two key points, or the main points in which you need to really master to give it an impact to the reading passage. All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the humanities passage. And what we can do is we can, look at it in a little more detail on how we're supposed to connect the dots and how we're supposed to refer back to the passages once we're given the questions. All right. So let's move on to the today's passage, which is on the 184 and pages 184 and 185 of your red books. Please open them. All right. So again, it just came up. One of the other feedbacks that I have from you guys is that which book is the best to use in preparation or in preparing for ACT. Now, I would have to say real ACT from the actual the testing manufacturers or testing center, right? ACT. This is the best because what they use is they use the old materials, or at least the recent materials that came out in the real test, and they actually put it into a compilation of it. So I think that would be the best. Barron's, Kaplan, Princeton Review, they all have a good, decent, ACT materials, but I would have to say that the best would be real ACT. All right, so try making use of this, and maybe buy a new edition that will come out in probably months' time. Okay, all right, let's move on. So we're into the humanities now. Of course, the humanities, like the social sciences, like the social science, will deal with the human issues. All right, the issues that encapsulate, or the issues that encircle the humanity in itself. Now, of course, this could mean a lot of things. For example, humanities could deal with anthropology, the study of human beings and its lineages, and it could deal with, say, social sciences for that matter, but a little bit of a deeper manner and sense. Okay, so for example, if the social sciences will deal with, say, a American issue, right? Because we're talking about the society, so American issue. Humanities will deal more with the international or global issues for that sense. All right, but of course it will obviously it will come back to the U.S. humanities as well, because what ACT and TOEFL and any other testings that's made in U.S. is aiming to do is to give you that cultural view, U.S. cultural view, right? So therefore, that's the idea here. So what you're going to look at today would be the humanities passage. Although it seemed like it will deal with the global issues, it will deal right back to, or it will go right back to the U.S. cultural issues. All right, let's take a look at that, and if that's true. So the first thing, of course, to do is to read this part. This passage is adapted from the obviously a difficult name, Bharati Mukherjee's essay, A 400-Year-Old Woman. All right, so that's an essay written by a whatever this person is. I'm not so sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Mukherjee's, right? And it says, which appears in the anthology, which is the collection of the essays, the writer on her work, right? All right, so anyways, the writer is she, and she writes a 400-year-old woman, but if it says the writer on her work, so therefore the writer talks about herself rather than anybody else, right? And that's something that you can get. So the writer on her work, so meaning that she's writing about herself, and I guess a 400-year-old woman is about herself, right? I mean, that much we can get, all right? And from the looks of the name, Bharati Mukherjee's, right, we can definitely say that she's not an American descent, but she's probably of some other descent, right? I mean, if she were an American descent, well, for example, if she were an American descent and let's say she was a foreigner who moved to the U.S. and she was raised up there, I mean, she would have a different name than Bharati Mukherjee's, right? I mean, usually the American descents would have an American first name, and then the relatively very ancestral last name, and they will keep that name, right? So anyways, that's something that we can get from whatever that we can get from in this part of the passage. Now, moving on to the actual passage. Now, remember, I told you always this is an introductory part of it. So what you want to do is read the first and the last sentence of it, right? So it says, I was born into a class that did not live in its native language. Now, that already shows you some kind of a segregation or some kind of a problem or social or say humanity issues or social issues that she was facing when she was born into something, right? Now, she was born into a class. I guess the society that she lived in or she was born into still had the class system, and that did not live in its native language, meaning she, not living in native language means that she was somehow segregated from from the society in itself because she was something else. She was an outsider, or her, not herself only, but I guess her family or her people were an outsider to this part or particular part of the town or part of the village. And then we're going to read the last sentence. It says, the larger political entity to which I gave my first allegiance, India, was not even a sovereign nation when I was born. So we can pretty much say that she is descended from India or somewhere close to that region, because she says the first allegiance that she gave to our political entity that she gave first allegiance to was India. Doesn't mean that she lived in India, or it could mean that she lived in India, but it doesn't really necessarily mean that she's an Indian descent, right? So anyways, was not even a sovereign nation when I was born. So I guess we're talking about back then. We're talking about in the early 1900s, maybe. Before India was independent from England. I think that's what we're talking about here, right? So anyways, that's the idea first that you can get from reading the introductory part of the passage. You know that she was born into a class, didn't even live in its native language, and you know that she was living somewhere in the Indian region, right? Where she gave the first political, or her first allegiance to the political entity, which was India, and India was not even a sovereign nation back then. So you get a whole picture, or at least a very good picture of where she's from and what kind of person she is, right? Okay, moving on to the second paragraph. It says, my horoscope cast by a neighborhood astrologer when I was a week-old infant predicted that I would be a writer, that I would cross oceans and make my home among aliens. So I guess that's it. So again, it talks about her path into becoming a writer. It says, my horoscope, right? You know what a horoscope is, right? For example, a horoscope is, for me, I was born sometime in October, so meaning I'm a Libra. And Libra, if you look at the back of your newspaper, usually they don't have it these days, but some of the newspapers will have it. So if you look at it, it will tell you what will happen this month or what will happen today, according to the signs and well, anyways, right? My horoscope, of course, we can't say that's for sure an exact science, but my horoscope cast by my neighborhood astrologer, that says it all, right? Neighborhood astrologer, not even a professional astrologer, was when I was a week-old infant, predicted that I would be a writer, right? So she was destined to be a writer, I guess. That's what she's probably trying to say, that I would cross oceans, definitely, because again, we'll read that in due time, but that's what we're talking about. We start from a global point of view into U.S. point of view. So that's what we're looking at right now, and make my home among aliens, right? Okay, so we get that idea. It kind of tells us that she was sort of destined to become a writer, right? All right, third paragraph. I found my way to the United States. You see how U.S. brings right up, right? So here, when she said she would cross the oceans, it means that she immigrated to U.S., right? And it says, after many transit stops, right? So she did actually move to U.S., I guess, right? We don't know when, we don't know how, but she probably rode on ships, or she had to go to somewhere else to get to the U.S., Maybe you will find that here. But what we want to know is that she had found her way, right, to the United States after many transit stops, meaning there were a lot of things that would happen along the way as she got to U.S., right? Next, fourth paragraph. It took me 10 painful years from the early 70s to the early 80s to overthrow the smothering tyranny of nostalgia. So nostalgia usually, now if you remember the last time when we were looking into some of the passages, right, especially the prose fictions, you saw, if you remember that Vietnamese paper or Vietnamese story where two generations of Vietnamese family have moved to the States, and of course the daughter, I don't know if it was daughter or the son, I don't remember exactly, but the child deals with it in a very easier sense as opposed to her mother or his mother having difficulty engaging into the different society. And I guess that's the same thing here that's happening. It says from early 70s to the early 80s, for 10 years, she overthrew the smothering tyranny of nostalgia, meaning she was nostalgic about her India or her life back in her home, right? I mean, that usually happens to people who move to some other places. They really get this nostalgic effect. They get homesick, and it's really difficult to overcome that problem, right? Now, that's the idea. It kind of gives us her difficulty in adjusting to the life in the new world, right? Okay, and the fifth paragraph. My literary agenda begins by acknowledging that America has transformed me. All right, so here she says something about her literary agenda, meaning what she writes about, right? Her literary agenda begins by acknowledging that America has transformed me. As in, remember, this is the flow of the story. It took her 10 painful years to adapt to U.S. or to overthrow that feeling of nostalgia, right? Her homesickness. And it says that it changed her, it transformed her, right? Her literary agenda, so what she's writing about, right? She's a writer, right? She's a writer. So what she's writing about is definitely something about the transformation that she has gone through, right? So quite possibly the transformation we're talking about is probably how she, overcame that feeling of nostalgia, or overcame that problem that she had over 10 years, and she really wants to make that experience into a writing, right? Okay, so that's the idea. Next paragraph. I'd have to sensitize editors as well as readers to the richness of the lives I'm writing about. So she's writing about the lives, we don't know which lives, but pretty much she wants to write about her own life, right? Meaning there are a whole bunch of other immigrants, right, who would move to the States from everywhere else, right? And she wants to write about those lives because she has to sensitize the editors, meaning let the editors and the readers know something about the richness of the lives of these people, right? Lives of these people who have moved to the States, all right? Okay. And then the next paragraph, I've been blessed with an enormity of material. Since there's a column, we'll read a little through. It says the rapid and dramatic transformation of the United States since the early 1970s. All right. So here, so she's been blessed with things to write about, 1970s to all throughout the ages. Now, 1970s in America saw a lot of changes, a lot of say problems in a social level. If you think about 70s was when Vietnam War just broke out, or at least it broke out in like 10 years ago, like a decade ago in 1963, if I remember right. It continued on for about 10 years, and 70s were sort of like the ending of the war, and how people were holding like peaceful anti-war anti-war demonstrations, and especially the students, and not just students, maybe like the hippie students, and as well as the blacks, and as well as all the other like racial groups had formed so that they could express their injustice in the society, not just against war, but against all kinds of say derogatory, or all kinds of demeaning human right issues, right? So that's the whole idea. So that's what she's saying. She saw a rapid and dramatic transformation in the U.S. All right, a lot of things changed in 1970s. And then it says, yet my imaginative home is also in the tales told by my mother and grandmother, the world of the Hindu epics, right? So yet here, she says, yet my imaginative home. So she's talking about her home as in U.S. right now, but her imaginative home back in India, right? And she says that the tales told by her mother and grandmother, the world of Hindu epics. So she's probably thinking of her heritage, right? This is what many people who move to states go through as they grow up in a different culture. Now, I was the same person. I was this person. I moved to the States a long time ago, and then, of course, I do have my heritage, like my inherent Koreanness in me, and then I had that different culture, and it was really hard to adjust to that. My parents being full Korean or fully Korean, it was difficult for them to really adjust to that new world. I had difficulty not adjusting to the new world, but I had difficulty adjusting within myself the inherent Korean that I am, and the person who grew up in States, and that was a really difficult thing to do. And so she is talking about that in that sense. All right, moving on to the next. It says, writers, especially American writers weaned on affluence and freedom, often disavowed the notion of a literary duty or political consciousness, citing the all too frequent examples of writers ruined by their shrill commitments. So here she is sort of like making arguments as writers, especially the American writers, weaned on affluence and freedom. So meaning these writers who are pretty much focused, or pretty much are from rich and the freedom part, or they are very used to the richness and the freedom of it all, often disavow, they sort of ignore the notion of a literary duty or political consciousness, right? By saying that the all too frequent examples of writers ruined by their shrill commitments. Okay, so the idea here is that she does not want to be focusing on mediocre stuff, right? Things that are too common, right? She doesn't want to focus on that. She wants to keep her literary duty and political consciousness, and so that she can convey these ideas to the people who are reading her paper, right? Okay, so up to there is the idea. Now, we haven't read the entire passage. We only read the necessary parts of the passage, right? As you can see here, read only the necessary part. We have left out this much blank, right? We also have left out this much blank. We also have left out this much blank, this much blank, right? We also left out this much blank and this much blank. We have left out a lot of blanks, right? Now remember, that's not going to cause you any problem, because you know that first paragraph was talking about her origin in India, right? Well, it could be India, it could be somewhere in the Indian region, but that's the part of it, right? Part of the idea. And then the second paragraph talks about how she, became, or how she was destined, how she feels that she's destined to become a writer. And then the third paragraph talks about how she moved to the States. And then the fifth paragraph talks about how it was difficult for her to adjust to the new world. And then it says, my literary agenda, as in what she wants to write about, or what she actually writes about. And then the next paragraph, of course, talks about how she had to, sensitize the editors and the readers of the lives that she was going to write about, right? And then, of course, it says, I'm blessed with the enormity of the materials, because it was 1970s and 80s, and she saw that a lot of things happened in the U.S. And then, of course, yet she says something about her home, her homesickness, right? That part of the world that she lived in, or at least the part of the world that she's from. And then the last says, the writers today are very much, focused on the affluence, or at least they're focused on things that are not so important, but she wants to focus on things that are important. You see how things get somehow connected in a parallel line, or at least in a line or linear form, right? I mean, you can connect these stories and come up with at least the explanation of what the entire passage will talk about. We don't know the details yet, but we know what the passages will talk about, right? So keep that in mind. Let's move to the first question. 21. One of the main arguments the author is trying to make in the passage is that, right? So what would be the main idea? What would be the argument that she's trying to make? All right. This should be easy because you already know what she's talking about. Until recently, foreign-born residents have not wanted to be involved in defining the American reality. Now, of course, that doesn't sound right, because we're not really talking about the American reality and how the foreign-born residents have not wanted to be involved in it. I'm pretty sure they want to be involved in it because they want to change lives for themselves, right? Non-Western immigrants are changing the definition of what it means to be an American. That sounds about right, because that's what she wants to talk about. She wants to say that editors and the readers must be sensitized to the richness of the lives of the people, right? These people who have moved to the States. And so maybe that's a possibility. We'll check that for now. See, it says, the United States immigration policy is inherently unfair. Now, I don't think she's talking about the detailed immigration processes and the procedures. I don't think that's the idea. And D, of course, Americans have changed the political affiliations of most non-Western immigrants. But I don't think Americans changing some kind of a political affiliations of these people are not the part of the idea. So the only part of the idea here is that non-Western immigrants are changing the definition of what it means to be an American, right? That's the best answer. And of course, the answer is B. Now, why is that? Well, of course, what we're talking about here is that she wants to write about, right? She wants to write about the people who moved to the States, right? Just like her, who have moved to the States from the original countries that they're from and try to make living there. And she says how their lives are very rich. Right, that's the idea. So I guess the idea here is that she wants to convey is that the immigrants are actually changing what it means to be an American. What it means to be an American is not just, you're white and you live in a nice house and whatever. You enjoy your freedom. I don't think that's American. But what she's saying is that American is, or being an American is different in the sense that these people who have moved from the different countries are also American. So as I am American. So she's saying that she's American as well. But she has that different heritage different background she's from, so is everybody else who moved to the state, and that is American. That is being American, like bringing diversities, bringing in differentness to the melting pot of races. That's what America is about, and that's what she's saying, right? You get the idea here, right? Okay, I'm hoping that you do, because everything else here, they really don't make sense. Okay, moving on to the next, 22. Considering the information given in the first 3 paragraphs, you know what the 3 first paragraphs we'll talk about. Which of the following is the most accurate description of the author's girlhood and early adulthood? All right, so you know the early girlhood and the early adulthood. Now, why is that? Because you know that she's from, well, if you have to read it a little bit carefully now, let's go to that part of it. Now, she was born into a class that did not really speak its native language. And if you read it a little further, I was born into a city that feared its future and trained me for immigration, right? So she was living in a very desperate times, or she was living in a very dangerous times, I guess. I attended a school run by the Irish nuns, who regarded our walled-off school compound in Calcutta as a corner of England. So Calcutta, she was living in Calcutta, and it was like corner of the England, so meaning that the times were not so right. And it says, my country, called in Bengali Desh, I have never seen. It is the ancestral home of my father and is now in Bangladesh. And so I guess her parents are from Bangladesh, but they live in Calcutta, and she believes that her heritage, or her inherent heritage, is from Bangladesh as well as in Calcutta, because she lived and she was grown up there. Nevertheless, I speak his dialect of Bengali and think of myself as a belonging to Faridpur, the tiny village that was in his birthplace, right? So she believes that she's from this part of England, Bangladesh and Calcutta, and so on and on and on. Now, if that's the idea, and if it continues on, what would we see? What would be the following the most accurate description of the author's girlhood? F, she grew up and was educated in Calcutta. True, right? Moved to the States and lived in Manhattan. That sounds about right, because there was a mention of Calcutta and how she moved to the States in the second paragraph, right? We don't know if it's Manhattan. We need to just confirm that it's Manhattan. And G, she was born in Calcutta, was educated in England. Was she educated in England? No, she was educated in Calcutta, which was called a corner of the England, or corner of England, right? H, was raised in Bangladesh. No, she's never been there, although her parents are from Bangladesh, educated by Irish nuns. That's true. Moved first to the England. No, she did not move to England, because she says something about moving right to States. Well, of course, she had to take the transit stop, but that doesn't mean that she went to England and went to States. We'll try to check that a little bit later. Then it says J, she was born in Faridpur. No, that's not where she was born from. That was his father's, or that was her father's birthplace, and so therefore J is out of the question. And now let's try to make sure that she was educated in Calcutta. She was born, or she grew up and educated in Calcutta and moved to the States and lived in Manhattan, right? So let's check that part, whether it's true or not. So that part, we read that already. Her horoscope, brought up in a culture or places, the faith in horoscope never occurred to me to doubt it, astrologer, blah, 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 blah. And then it says, I found my way to the United States after many transit stops. All we need to figure out is whether she's been to England or not, right? But it says the unglimpsed phantom Faridpur and the all too real Manhattan have merged as dash. I am an American writer in the American mainstream, trying to extend it. This is a vitally important statement for me. I'm not an Indian writer, not an expatriate. I am an immigrant. My investment is in the American reality, not the Indian, right? So she's saying something about moving to the States and moving to Manhattan, not mentioning anything about England, although there might have been England in some kind of a transit stops here, but that's not the idea, right? So, of course, the answer is F. She grew up in Calcutta. She grew up and educated in Calcutta by the Irish nuns and moved to the States and lived in Manhattan. That's what she says, right? Okay, easy as that. Next question, 23. The author sees her literary agenda and her mission, sorry about the apostrophe, or at least the quotation, and her mission line 58 to B, right? So line 50, line 44. Now, but we already read this part. If you remember, the literary agenda that she's talking about in lines 44, you know what that is. She talks about her literary agenda as writing of her own, the richness of the people, of the lives of the people who have moved to the States, right? And then it says her mission. So her mission probably would be in the similar level or similar sense. So let's try to see if we can find some kind of a consolation to that. Excuse me. A, raising the political consciousness of recent immigrants to the United States. Now, political consciousness of the immigrants, that could be a possibility, right? Because it's very important. I mean, political stance, I guess, is important. So we'll just give it a 2 bar, right, out of 4 bars. B, creating characters whose cultural heritage is not easily identifiable. Now, I don't think that's her agenda. Her agenda is reality, not creating characters whose cultural heritage is not easily identifiable. So we'll just give it X. And then reinterpreting through her stories what it means to be an American. That could be a possibility because we saw that idea, right, what it means to be an American in the previous question, so we'll leave it up to that. And then it says finding an audience for her stories and novels. Well, her literary agenda is not to find the audience for her stories and novels, or her mission to be that, right? So we're either seeing A or B, or A or C as our answers, but we'll take a look at our answers. First of all, it's C, right? It's either A or C, but it's C. Now, why is A wrong? Political consciousness is not something that we really want to talk about. When you say political consciousness, I mean, these immigrants, although it's very important for the immigrants to have some kind of a political stance, because, the issues that come up these days are the illegal immigrants, should they be deported or should they be made citizens, right? I mean, that's the big issue in the U.S. Right now, or at least a year ago, right? And President Obama is trying to do something about it, but it's really difficult to do something about it because the bipartisans in the states, the Republicans and Democrats, are just fighting over the idea of whether to allow these immigrants to stay or whether to send them back, and the conservatives, the Republicans, are positing that they should be deported because they're taking over the jobs of the Americans, as opposed to the Democrats saying, Democrats are sort of agreeing with that idea as well, but Democrats are pretty much saying that we should give them, some kind of a refuge or some kind of a chance to become American. After all, America is a land of dreams and land of, success and whatever. And so the idea is, it's conflicting ideas right now. And so this is taking it too far. Her opinion on the political consciousness of the recent immigrants to the States is just not right? So the better idea is, again, what it means to be American, because if you remember here in the very first, right, it says non-Western immigrants are changing the definition of what it means to be an American, right? So again, we're talking about being an American, and here the best idea is reinterpreting through her stories what it means to be an American. Simple as that, right? Okay. Moving on, 24. Which of the following statements from the passage is an acknowledgement by the author that she was changed by America? Now, if you remember that very part of that passage, we'll go back a little bit, because I'm hoping that you remember this right here. My literary agenda begins by acknowledging that America has transformed me, changed me. So you need to read this part. It does not end until I show how I and the hundreds of thousands of like me have transformed America. So I guess what we're talking about is that she's been transformed by America, and that's the part of the question. So the question states, which of the following statements from the passage acknowledgement by the author that she was changed by America? F. The astrologer meant to offer me a melancholy future. All my girlhood I straddled the seesaw of contradiction. I'm someone who watches tractor pulls on obscure cable channels, and my characters can, I hope, transcend the straitjacket of simple psychologizing. Now, what you need to think here is that her acknowledgement that the America has changed her is actually her changing, right? Here, astrologer meant to offer me a melancholy future. I don't think that's a change at all, because it just gives you that astrologer, when she was a little girl in Calcutta, gave her this idea of, you need to become a writer and you will go, across the oceans and live among the aliens. I mean, that doesn't really necessarily mean that the America has changed her, so that's out of the question. All my girlhood, I straddled the seesaw of contradictions. Not really. That's not how we view as a change. It just means that she was locked into she was locked into a time where things were changing rapidly. That doesn't mean America has changed her, because girlhood is not simply true about where she was when she was in States. And it says, H, I'm someone who watches tractor pulls on obscure cable channels. Now we need to look into that to see whether that could mean any changes by American. And my characters can, I hope, transcend the straitjacket of simple psychologizing. Maybe we need to take a look at that as well. So we'll take a look at 68 to 69 and 73 to 74, all right, to see if we can get some kind of an answer to it. So let's take a look at 68 and 69. So we'll read from here somewhere. Okay, that's a better thing to do. For all the hope and energy I have placed in the process of immigration and accommodation, I'm a person who couldn't ride a public bus when she first arrived, and now I'm someone who watches tractor pulls on obscure cable channels. There are parts of me that remain Indian. There you go, right? So it says, I'm a person who couldn't even get onto a public bus, right? And when she arrived, but now I'm someone who watches tractor pulls on obscure cable channels, right? So she's a different person now, right? She's a changed person. I guess that's the idea that kind of gives us that America has changed her. At least that's the acknowledgement, acknowledgement on how she was changed. All right, 78 to 79. Let's read that part. We'll read from here. The people I write about are culturally and politically several hundred years old, considering the history they have witnessed: colonialism, technology, education, liberation, civil war. They have shed old identities, taken on new ones, and learned to hide the scars. They may sell you newspapers or clean your offices at night, and so on and on and on. All right, so we'll read a little bit up. We'll have to read a little bit above. It says, my characters cannot, I hope, transcend the straitjackets of simple psychologizing. The people I write about. Again, that's not changing at all. So I guess this part is the best part in saying that she has been transformed by America, right? She was a person who couldn't even get on the bus. Now she is just someone watches the tractor pulls on obscure cable channels, right? So meaning that she doesn't really think of it as much now. It's nothing much, nothing new. Everything is been there, done that, sort of, right? So she's a changed person. So of course the answer has to be someone who watches the tractor pulls on obscure cable channels, right? The best answer. All right, moving on to the next. The author refers to the village of Faridpur as a phantom because, all right? Now remember, was she born in Faridpur? No, it's her parents, her father's birthplace, right? But she considers it as a sort of like a hometown, so to speak, because her father was born from it. Now it's in Bangladesh, and she feels that she's not quite Indian, not quite Bangladesh, and so you get the idea there. Now let's take a look at it. It is a part of the Indian mythology her mother told her about. Well, not really. It's a village, not a mythology. She considers Manhattan, not Bangladesh, to be her home. Does she consider Manhattan to be her home? But when she says something about her heritage Indian, right? Yet she doesn't really forget about her imaginative home. That's what she said in the lines. Even though it was once part of India, it is not part of Bangladesh. I guess that's also true. Yes, that's true, but that's got nothing to do with the word phantom. Even though she considers it to be her ancestral home, she has never been there. I guess that would be the best answer, right? She's never been there. Remember, she considers it to be her ancestral home. She considers it her hometown, but she's never been there. It's in part of Bangladesh, and it's her father's hometown. It doesn't mean that she was born there. It just means that she feels that urge towards it, or at least she feels that some kind of connectedness towards it. So the answer has to be D, right? Simple as that. Moving on to number 26, let's see. When the author says that she's trying to extend it, line 30, she most likely means that she wants to do what? Now, by accident or whatever, we read that part, right? Line 30, we'll go back to it and see what it means. We read that part when we were reading something else, but that's the idea here. The reading is all about that. says, I found my way to the United States after many transit stops. The unglimpsed phantom very poor and all and the all too real Manhattan have merged as dash. I am an American writer in the American mainstream, trying to extend it. This is a vitally important statement for me. I'm not an Indian writer, not an expatriate. I am an immigrant. My investment is in the American reality, not the Indian. So when she says she's trying to extend it, now if you think about that idea, you look like an Indian, right? I mean, I'm not trying to be a racist here, but if you are an Indian, if you look like an Indian, if you live in America, would it be really easy for you to become a mainstream writer? Or it would be really difficult, right? I mean, different races to become a mainstream writer. I mean, today it would be viable, but in the 70s and 80s, it would have been really difficult. And that's what she's talking about. She's a mainstream writer and she's trying to extend it, meaning she's trying to make it, she's trying to, be more of a mainstream writer, American writer. So let's go back to the question and see if we can get there. So, she wants to see people from non-European ethnicities included in what is considered mainstream America. That could be a possibility. Or she prefers to be part of both the Indian and the American cultures. Now she's trying to extend it. She clearly says that she's not an Indian writer. She's an American writer who wants to see the realities in America, not in India. Is trying to find a way to make her home in the United States permanent. She already is. She's an immigrant. Is working to change regulations so that many more Indian immigrants can live in the United States. I don't think she's only talking about the Indian immigrants, but she's talking about the entire immigrant society or communities, right? So the best answer here is definitely F. Wants to see people of non-European ethnicity who move to the States, included what is considered the mainstream America. That's what she says about herself. She's trying to extend it, right? She's trying to extend it into the mainstream. Right? Mainstream writing. So that's what she's saying. All right, so the answer has to be F, right? Simple as that. Moving on to the next question. The author implies that she had to sensitize the editors, line 48, because those editors, so we already read that part. She wants to sensitize the editors and the readers, right? Why is that? Because she wants to tell them of the richness of the lives of these people. Now, did not understand many Asian Americans were already reading her work. Gave superficial praise to her work but would not publish her novels, were overtly discriminatory when it came to the non-Western writers, or tended to view the people she wrote about as one-dimensional. Now, we'll go back to it and try to see what it meant by sensitizing the editors, if it has that idea. So let's read that part. It says somewhere here, Sarah, you go, that's where we read it. It says, all readers, to the richness of the lives I'm writing about, the most moving form of praise I receive from the readers can be summed up in 3 words. I never knew. Meaning, I see these people, I'll call them the Indians, the Filipinos, the Koreans, the Chinese, around me all the time. I never knew they had an inner life. I never knew they schemed and cheated, suffered, cared so passionately. When even the forms of praise are so rudimentary, the writer knows she has an inexhaustible fictional populations to enumerate, perhaps even a mission. So what she's saying is she never knew, or at least not her, but the readers are, I never knew these immigrants had these kind of lives. They schemed and they cheated and they had, passionate lives or whatnot. So I guess that sums up, right? That sums up the idea. The best sum up of that part of the statement is that what? Is that they tended, the editors, sensitize the editors and the readers tended to view the people she wrote about as one-dimensional. They thought that the immigrants were one-dimensional, not three-dimensional, not two-dimensional, but one-dimensional only. They only had that one dimension where these people are trying to make living in the States and they work hard, I guess. That's the only thing that they thought about. Not that they had some kind of lives or they had family, they had romance, they had this and that, they never considered that. So the best answer would be to view the people she wrote about as one-dimensional. That's what she means when she says sensitize the editors, right? Okay, moving on to the next. According to the passage, by reading her stories, many of the author's readers learn, right? It's in conjunction to this question. It's continuing, right? Good fiction writing obscures cultural differences among characters. They have much more in common with the author's characters than they ever realized. Stories about immigrants to the United States generally have many more characters than do other types of stories. Or because of their immigrant status, people from non-Western countries have developed a stronger inner life than have most native-born Americans. Right? So which one is it? Which one does it, according to the passage, say by reading her stories, many of the author's readers learn? They learn, I never knew that, right? They learned this, I never knew. Meaning, they had to sensitize the editors and readers. And so, what would it be? Would it be the good fiction writing obscures cultural differences among characters? Or is it that they have much more in common with the author's characters than they have ever realized? Or is it the stories about immigrants to the United States generally have more characters than they normally would? Or because their immigrant status, people had to somehow develop stronger inner life than have most native-born Americans? That's not true, right? So the only thing that you can see here right now is, right now, this. Why is that? Now, we talked about how it says, I never knew, right? Never knew. Meaning, if you sort of like interpret that idea, I never knew they had different lives. I never knew that they had, they had these different, aspects of life, meaning that they are the same people as us, right? That they're the same people as us, meaning they have the same problems, that they have same dramas, they have the same, issues in their lives. Not just because they're immigrants, they work hard and they try to make living here, but they are different, or they are at least the same in the sense that, they go through the same difficulties as we do. So that's the idea. They have much more common with the author's characters than they ever realized. They're the same people, right? So somehow she's fighting off the racism. Somehow she's saying that we're about the same people. We do suffer from the same thing, so on and on and on, right? Okay, good. Next question, 29. The first paragraph states that at the time of the author's birth, India was. So, at the time of the author's birth, India was like what? Was it engaged in a war with England, not an independent country, still part of Bangladesh, governed by Irish? Now, from history, it wasn't really governed by the Irish. It did not engage in a war with England. They had no absolute resources. They had no power. They had no they had no arms. They had nothing to really compete against, or at least raise war against England. So that's not true. From the passage that India was not an independent country. True, right? You know that. And then it's still part of the Bangladesh. No, Bangladesh was probably the part of India, and it was independent from India sometime later, right? So the best answer is they were not an independent country, and you saw that from the passage, and I'm hoping that you get that, right? Easy question. Should have taken you 30 seconds to solve, or at least like 20 seconds to solve this question. All right, moving on to the last question. When the author says that people she writes about are culturally, politically, several hundred years old, lines 75 to 76, she most likely means that her characters are like what? Right? That's what we want to know. Accidentally or not, we read that part already. So we'll go back to 75 and 76 and see what it means. So let's go back to 75 and 76. We read that part. Remember, it's quite, crazy, but we actually have read that. So we'll read from here. It says the people I write about are culturally and politically several hundred years old, because consider the history they have witnessed. Consider the history these people have witnessed. They have witnessed the colonialization of England, or of India by England. Technology changes as in, like cars started to appear. I mean, India back then was probably like, there were cars around, but it was not common, but, it became common. And then education, definitely, right? Education changed. And liberations of different countries, India became independent from England. Civil war as well, right? So they've seen it all. And that's why she's saying that they are probably hundreds of years old, because they've seen so many changes in one lifetime, right? So, the answer in this case, so what does it mean? Have cultural and political viewpoints that are repressive and outdated? Or is it they have rejected Bengali, British, Irish, and American values? Or is it they have experienced an incredible amount of change in just one lifetime? Or is it are really her mother's and grandmother's ancestors? So you're only given with this choice, which is this, right? They have experienced so many things, incredible amount of changes in one lifetime. And that's why she's saying that they're several hundred years old culturally and politically, right? Think about it. If you were born in 1920s and let's say talk about Korea for just just to give you an idea. If you were born in 1920s in Korea, you would have seen, or no, let's not talk about 1920s, but let's say 1910, all right? So let's say if you were born in 1910 in Korea, you've seen the colonization of Korea by Japan, or Japanese occupation. You've seen that. And along the way, you've probably seen the Korean War in 1950s, right? And then you've seen the economic changes, technological changes that Korea has made starting from 1960s, right? Recuperation from the war, and up to 1990s, just before the economic sort of a recession, right? I mean, you've seen like exponential growth in technology, education, and everything, right? And so therefore, if you're still alive until now, 2015, you'd probably have seen a lot of things that happen in one lifetime. And you've seen all the changes there could possibly be. How people dress would have changed, how people communicate would have changed, how people transported themselves or transported the different materials have changed. I mean, things have changed a lot, right? And that's what she's talking about. Have experienced an incredible amount of change in just one lifetime. All right? Good. So 10 questions. All right? So remember, again, just to wrap it up, what I want to tell you is that these passages are not so difficult. You could have, I mean, maybe I'm making it look like easy, but it is easy. All you have to do is understand the different parts of the passages, right? Different parts meaning the first and the last sentence of the first paragraph, and rest of the paragraphs, the first sentences, to try to see that, that somehow these stories will connect, all right, with no problem, or you will see that clear connection point, and then you know what each and different paragraphs, or each and every paragraph will talk about, and you can connect the ideas, and then you can fill in the contents by reading and by background knowledges, and then you can start solving the questions. And when you go back to that passage, you know where to go back, right? And of course, some of the questions will give you these lines, right? Lines 75 to 76. So all you have to do is go back to the lines, but you don't really have to do that even, because you know where they appear, right? You know where they appear in the passage in itself. So again, I want you to practice it really hard, right? Really hard, so that you can get this done. You can get this one passage done in under 7 minutes time, all right? Reading probably 2 minutes, and then rest of the questions 30 seconds or so, right? Or a minute or 30 seconds, so that you can, do this in a faster sense. Remember, you only have 35 minutes for 40 questions, right? Remember that, please. All right. So practice. All right. And we're going to continue with the humanities on the next picture, or next recording, or next lesson, so that you can somehow feel that humanities just don't deal, or it deals with a certain material. All right. It's a little bit different from the social sciences. Okay. All right. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.